Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show, Colorado Business News. This is part 2 of our 2-part series, continuing to talk with members of the Colorado General Assembly. In part 1, we had Senator Raleigh Heath. Raleigh, again, welcome back.
Thanks, Aaron.
And we also had Representative Polly Lawrence. Polly, thank you for staying.
Absolutely.
And now in the middle, joining us as our surprise guest is Representative Beth McCann. Beth, thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure.
Great to have you. All right, we've talked a lot about a number of specific issues in the first show. Let's talk about kind of the culture of government. And I'd like to talk about what are people's, what are the voters, what are citizens' expectations of government? Are those expectations reasonable? And how have those perspectives evolved? And Raleigh, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Aaron. Way back, 2009, I chaired something called the Long-Term Fiscal Policy Commission. And before we started, we said, okay, if you're going to know what you're going to fund, you better know what you're going to do. So we have this conversation about what's the role of government. And it was really interesting because fully a fourth of this, these were not all legislators, by the way. There were only 4 legislators, 12 citizens. 4 felt the only role of government was basically the judiciary, the court system and jails, infrastructure, and 1 through 12, not preschool, not higher ed. So we've got this fundamental conversation that's going on, I think, at all levels of government as to what's the role of government. And if you don't agree on that, then this whole question around budget, around funding, around Tabor, it's hard to have a conversation unless you know where you're coming from. So I think that's really the fundamental issue: is a safety net part of government? Is preschool a part of government? Is higher ed a part of government? And there are really strong disagreements among the average citizen out there, and that's what we're dealing with. And that, I think, is causing a lot of the conversation at the presidential level, certainly at the state level, and it manifests itself every day on the floor of the House and the Senate in the state of Colorado. And that's what a lot of this conversation's about.
All right, Beth, what's your take on the role of government and how it's evolving?
I think Senator Heath makes a very good point about the different, and I would call it kind of value systems that people have about big government versus smaller government. And, I'm a little more in the camp of the government has an obligation to provide for those who are less fortunate, the safety net, that we have that obligation as the kind of country that we are. But I know there are others who feel that's not really, shouldn't really be a big part of government, that people should be able to make it on their own, and that they don't really need, or that the government shouldn't be providing that sort of safety net for those who are less fortunate and can't make it on their own. So, but it gets very gray, because then business owners like to have tax incentives and subsidies from the government. So, how you draw those lines occupies a great deal of our time down at the legislature, particularly when we're talking about the budget, but also individual bills that people bring to provide stimulus for growth in the economy, and also to provide things like job training for people who aren't able to get jobs. So it's very complex. I think you asked, what do people expect? I think people expect the government to work, that they expect that the government will provide those things that are absolutely necessary. But then once you get past that, it gets much grayer and more complicated.
All right, Paul, what's your I think I may hear something a little different in terms of perspective.
You may hear something a little bit different. I think government needs to be as small and efficient as it can be. There are certain things that government should provide, to Raleigh's point, public safety. We're supposed to keep the bad guys off people's front porches. Court system, infrastructure and transportation, because that's something that individual communities really can't handle on their own. But what we've seen, in my time in the legislature, which is only 3 years, a budget that has grown every single year, and yet we never seem to have enough money for all the things that people want us to do. And I think that's where we have a disconnect, is people are starting to expect the government to provide more than we actually should. I think what we need to be doing is communicate a policy that empowers people and gives them the opportunities to meet their goals. Not everybody has the same goal. And as long as we're creating a level playing field for people going forward, then it's kind of up to them to figure out how they attain those goals. If they want to be entrepreneurial, how do we reduce the governmental burdens that are on them that may be holding them back? And I just think the government needs to be as lean and efficient as it possibly can be.
Is our state government, are there ways to make our state government significantly more efficient, do you think?
Well,
you can be honest.
I think we could look at all the departments and take a pretty close look. I mean, I'm always very aware when we add FTEs, full-time equivalents, to the state budget. It may be that we're requested to add one person for this project. Well, once you add one person to the state payroll, that person is there in perpetuity. That job is there in perpetuity. And whether that person leaves, somebody else is going to be asked to fill that. And I think we need to be very conscious about what we're doing on the state level, adding personnel, growing departments, making sure that we have the correct oversight, and making sure that government is very transparent in how it's using our tax dollars.
Raleigh, I mean, you've got just extraordinary business experience, and you also now, because of your service in state government, have had the chance to really look at how it functions. What could the state do that would make it more efficient? Or is it, and I mean significantly more efficient, I'm not talking about a 1 or 2% efficiency, I'm about 10, 20, 30%. Is that a possibility, or is this really a state government that's running so efficiently there's not much opportunity for improvement?
Well, Aaron, thank you. I've run $1 billion business. I've started 2 of my own from scratch, so I think I've got pretty good cross-section. I was frankly very pleasantly surprised when I came in and saw all of the things that we do to safeguard this government growing beyond. When Governor Hickenlooper came in, a businessman, I might add, the first thing he did was all the departments sat down and they went through literally line by line, person by person, because I think he came in with the idea that we've got to make this government as efficient as it could be, and I think he did that, and I think he continues to do that. Aaron, over 50% of our budget goes to education. And education is local control, as we know. We discussed this in segment 1 in higher ed. And we're spending the lowest in the country for all practical purposes on both K through 12 and higher ed. And this whole notion that we're going to cut out 10, 20%, I mean, it's just folly. I would love to think that could be the case, but it's not. And we are not paying teachers what they should be paid. We are not providing the safety network, I believe, that we should to people that really need that help. So we've got one of the leanest state governments in the whole country when you look at it on a per capita basis. So there's not a lot of money that's just out there not being used effectively.
Beth, what's your sense, being in the legislature, not just that that funds are being used effectively or efficiently for current purposes, are there things that we're doing, for example, that maybe we shouldn't do, even if we're doing them efficiently? I don't know if that question makes sense or not.
Well, nothing comes jumping out at me that that our government in the Colorado state government is doing that it shouldn't be doing. I think that I agree with Senator Heath that my observation is that our government is pretty lean. When you talk to state workers and they talk about the workload they have, I've done some work in the child welfare arena and mental health, and we just are not, the load that those caseworkers carry when they have child welfare cases is unconscionable. And we can't risk the dangers to our young children by overloading our caseworkers. And I think that we are always balancing, what they tell us once the budget is proposed through the JBC. If we want to add something, we have to find a place to cut it. So I can't go and say, well, I want to add 6 caseworkers unless I take that amount of money away from something else, which is really hard. So I think we have a lot of balance and checks and balance. That's not to say that there may be an individual here or there in the government that is, not performing as well as they should. But overall, I think it's hard to say that there's an area that we could really cut that wouldn't impact a lot of people.
Okay, when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about protecting our children and how well we're doing that. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back with Polly, Beth, and Raleigh in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbortv.com.
Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. For information about the program, who our upcoming guests and topics are, and ways you can participate, please go to our website. That's harbortv.com. And most of all, thanks for watching.
I'm Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland.
Hi, I'm Jim Cameron, Director of Avatar.
I'm Christina Johnson, former Undersecretary of Energy.
Hi, I'm Oliver Stone.
Hi, I'm Mike Peters. I'm the creator of Mother Goose and Grimm.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show.
I would encourage you to watch The Aaron Harber Show. It's good fun.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show because he's a really cool guy.
Please watch The Aaron Harber Show, on which I do appear.
I want you to watch The Aaron Harber Show. Grimmy watches it every day.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter and find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scenes photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
Your opinions, ideas, suggestions, and criticisms related to guests, topics, questions, or the host are welcome. Please send an email to producer@harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We're with 3 members of the Colorado General Assembly, Raleigh Heath, Beth McCann, and Polly Lawrence. So we were talking about, and Beth, you were talking about caseloads, and especially in terms of some of the social service issues. It seems like over the last several years, and maybe decade, we constantly see a stream of reports of government, whether it be at the state level, at the county level, failing kids, where kids are abused, where kids get murdered, by their parents or whomever. Are we not doing a good job on that front? I know the state has attempted to make a number of improvements, but why do we keep seeing these stories? Polly, I'm going to start with you. If you have a sense of, can we do a better job, or do you have a take on this?
I have just seen the stories in the paper too, and gotten a little information from the departments through other representatives who sit on some of the health committees. I think we do need to do a much better job. Obviously, there are children who are being injured and killed even when they're in the system. They're supposed to be protected. And what we're finding, not in every instance, but in some, is that caseworkers are not checking on these kids the way they're supposed to. And how we go about changing that, I think we need to have some very serious conversations with the head of these departments, statewide and locally, to make sure that cases are assigned appropriately to the caseworkers and that these kids are being monitored, that somebody is paying attention to these situations where we have children in danger.
Okay, Beth, I mean, we also have stories about teens being, in custody, being over-medicated by the state, teen recidivism rate that is just extraordinarily high, where we're not releasing young people, and we're not releasing a lot of people who have been incarcerated with any kind of social skills, job, employment skills, or, I mean, we're just putting people out on the street that really have no future. And I know we've been doing a better job, but what else do we need to do in any of these areas? And go back to even protecting the real little ones.
Well, to me, you know, having a good social services system is crime prevention. So they don't ultimately get into the criminal system if we can provide them with support, those that need it in the home or in school. And then we do need to prepare, you know, we're incarcerating too many people in this country, and we need to prepare them better for life outside of prison. We did some bills last year having to do with the way juveniles are treated in court. For example, they're often shackled, even 10-year-olds in court, and things that we can address as a legislature include looking at that kind of an issue, and also solitary confinement is another big issue for juveniles.
So why do we have, what is it, 2 million people incarcerated in this country, more than any other, certainly any other industrialized nation, and I think maybe any other country on the planet? Why is that? Now, are Americans just crime happy? Do we just like committing crimes? Or are we bred to commit crime? What's the root of the problem, and who's looking at this, and how do we address it so that we don't have so many people committing crimes in the first place?
Well, the first question, there are many people who believe that it started in the 80s when we had the war on drugs. And the federal government in particular passed very draconian mandatory minimum sentences. So we had a lot of low-level drug folks ending up in long sentences, and that happened in Colorado as well. It happened in most states. The legislature a couple years ago did reduce our mandatory minimums for some of our drug crimes, but that's something that we need to continue to look at.
Right, and there's been federal movement on that too.
Definitely, there's a bill
in 2015, and I know 2016 as well. Raleigh, what's your sense of?
Well, I think so much goes back to how we look at kids. And of course, a lot of the things you're referring to deals with the foster care system and the state. And we've had a lot of controversy about you know, whether state or local. And, I know coming from Boulder, I think we have an outstanding child welfare system. But again, it varies from counties, and it also varies for funding. Boulder happens to fund it at a higher level than certainly a lot of the rural counties can do. So, and I think the way we look at kids and the rest of the world looks at kids, we tend to incarcerate more and put, I think, a higher premium. And again, this goes back to the role of government. Do we basically, is that one of the roles of government, to protect kids?
All right, what about the role of parents? It seems to me that a lot of this is rooted in poor parenting, if I may say so publicly, or a lack of parenting, where people are having kids who don't know how to raise them. I mean, you look at how parenting was done 30, 40, 50 years ago, and you look at the number of kids today who have troubled parents and become troubled kids. What can we do about that, Polly? Should you have to take a course in parenting at your church or at school or something before you're allowed to have kids?
Well, to your point about churches stepping in, there are other states that have faith-based organizations that step in to help families that may be struggling, so that it doesn't fall on the state to step in, and that has really helped some of these families who are struggling you know, take better care of their kids, get their kids on the right track, teach them some parenting skills that they may need. And I think we need to be willing to look outside government for some of these solutions. And right now, I think we're looking at Department of Human Services a little too much. We need to look at our churches and our community organizations.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have kids and really don't know what they're getting into. Is that an unfair?
I think most people have.
But maybe that's been true for eons. I don't know. Quick
I
final
would just
comment.
quickly say that's the hardest job that an adult can have is being a parent. It's a tough job, even with the greatest of kids.
All right. Well, I can think of harder jobs, but I'm not sending you all off to Afghanistan or anything like that. But it's certainly a challenge. All right. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in our final segment with our members of the General Assembly.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. We depend on contributions to support our work to bring you some of the nation's and world's top opinion leaders. Individuals, businesses, foundations, and other nonprofits make tax-deductible contributions to the Democracy and Media Education Foundation to allow us to work for you. To find out more or to make a donation, please go to dmefd.org. Thanks for watching the show and for your support. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter and find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scenes photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
Your opinions, ideas, suggestions, and criticisms related to guests, topics, questions, or the host are welcome. Please send an email to producer@harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is our final segment in part 2 of our 2-part series with our members of the General Assembly. So we talked a little bit about kids and kind of prisons and all that. What about the whole issue of when you consider the judicial system in the state of Colorado and the fact that the judiciary, according to many, is overburdened, is not handling cases very quickly in terms of swift justice. Give me some comments and sense. Beth, certainly this is an area you have expertise in.
Well, I do think we've added some judges, and I think that right now, I think the courts are operating pretty well in terms of handling the caseloads. I think there's always room for improvement, but I'm not hearing as much about it in the last year or two than I'd had before.
Is that because people have gotten accustomed to a lower standard of quality and have given up? I mean, when you file a civil case today in many jurisdictions, it takes months or even a year or two for cases to be heard. That strikes me as ridiculous, and all it does, of course, is add tremendously to the expense of the case. So I would disagree. I don't think things are working well. Polly, what's your take?
Well, I think the judicial system, to Beth's point, we have added judges. The public defenders have grown their department substantially in the last couple of years. One of the issues that I'm working on deals with open records for the judicial branch. They have interpreted that they're not subject to the Colorado open records rules as the executive and legislative branches are, and so currently they're writing their own rules about that. I don't think they are going to be as transparent as they should be. We should be able to see how they're using our tax dollars. And obviously they have issues that other branches don't because they're dealing with defendants. So we need to protect that attorney-client privileged information. But we should be able to see how they're using their tax dollars, how they're staffing their departments, how the public defenders are staffing different cases that they represent, so that we have a better picture of just how that department functions.
One of the issues that came out in reference to what you were talking about was during the trial of James Holmes and the theater killings, was that the public does not know how much money the defense spent. I didn't understand why is there any rationale for the public not to know how much we're spending on particular cases? Beth, is there a reason for why we shouldn't know?
Well, the reason that's put forward is protecting attorney-client privilege.
But how does that protect attorney-client privilege?
Well, because if you look at the individual billings, they have notes sometimes about things they talked about, but
you can redact that.
And
yeah.
I mean, in court, often in civil cases, in certain cases, people are entitled to attorney's fees if they win. So we always get the attorney's fees printed out of what the other side charged. Now they do from time to time redact things, but it's certainly doable. So I'm personally a little skeptical of the argument.
Raleigh, how do we reduce the burden on courts so that we don't have to add judges, we don't have to add staff? And I mean, some courtrooms now, judges and courts, districts can't afford to have a court reporter in the courtroom. Some judges have literally hundreds of cases that they're dealing with, and I know they're not hundreds of trials, but a large number of cases. Is there a way to step back and say maybe we can do things differently differently in Colorado, so we don't burden the system as much. And so, in fact, with the resources we're putting into it, they can do a more effective and better job.
Aaron, you know the interesting thing, because I'm going to probably not answer your question directly, in the 7 years I've been in the Senate, and all the town halls I've had, all the emails I get, I probably haven't had 5 dealing with the judicial system. People seem to be reasonably satisfied. I understand that you're apparently not, but I can tell you the general public out there there's not a huge outcry about our judicial system.
Well,
at least as I've experienced it.
I don't know. Ask anybody what they think of lawyers. You may get a different opinion.
That's a different subject. You're asking about the court system, which I know has lawyers in it. But frankly, nobody's beating me up about let's do something about the judicial system.
All right, we're going to put your email on the show, and we'll see what that changes. All right, so Polly, I'm going to give you any other way we can do things more efficiently to wrap up this topic, do you think?
For judicial?
Yeah.
I just think it's getting a clear picture of what they're doing, how they're staffing their departments, how public defenders are staffing different cases, looking at the entire department, being able to access the information that tells us what they're doing with our tax dollars. I think that's the most important thing we can do right now. Okay, I know we only have a couple minutes left. One of the issues I want to talk quickly about is mental health. Certainly a big issue in the state in terms of, how do we do a better job of identifying people who need help, and where do we have the resources to help them, and do we? Polly, I'm going to let you continue then on this one. That mental health is a very difficult subject. It's nice that it is coming out of the shadows now. It used to be that people, if they had mental health issues, they did not talk about it at all. It is coming out of the shadows. It is a more public topic. But it's also something that really crosses that line to where what sort of information should the government have access to, what is just completely confidential between that physician and that patient. And I think that's where we struggle with some of policies regarding that.
All right, Beth, did you have a thought on that?
Yeah, well, so a couple years ago, we did put $20 million into our mental health system to establish crisis centers, 24/7 operations, and a statewide crisis mental health line. And that, I think, is helping. I've talked to people who are involved in that, and that is definitely helping the system. So, but again, it is there are a lot of people that need help, and the attention, I think, is good. We are seeing more interest in this issue, and more people talking about it without the stigma attached. But we are taking some actions statewide to try and address it.
All right, well, to be candid, $20 million to me sounds like a drop in the bucket. I mean, to most people, $20 million sounds like a lot of money, but given the magnitude of the problem, I mean, to me, that's barely doing anything. Raleigh. It
goes back to the role of government issue. I think this is one of the things. What incarceration rates? We're incarcerating people with mental health problems. It makes that number a lot higher that we talked about earlier. And clearly, we've got to spend more money on the preventive side, and mental health is the biggest area that I think we need to spend it on. We're funding mental health one of the lowest rates in the whole country. There's no question about that.
One good thing about the Affordable Care Act is that it does require parity for insurance companies to cover mental health treatment with physical health. So I'm hoping that more people will seek mental health treatment because insurance will now be providing it.
And how about an effort to identify people at a younger age who have challenges? Why aren't we doing more on that front? I know we have 30 seconds left. Anybody want to take that last question?
Well, I think we are trying to do that more effectively. All of these mass shootings, unfortunately, are bringing this really to the fore, and I think mental health professionals are very aware of their obligations with respect to people who might be dangerous.
Well, it seems to me, no matter where you are on Second Amendment issues or anything else, that I would think that the population, the citizens of the state of Colorado would be willing to invest more in mental health and helping people who need it. But with that in mind, I want to thank my guests, Polly Lawrence, Beth McCann, and Raleigh Heath, for joining me. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.